Welcome, 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 folks. This is James W. Falcon, the founder of the Encouragement by Design YouTube channel, maker and creator of a number of these series that I am proudly and enthusiastically presenting to you to facilitate your personal, professional, spiritual health and wellness, growth and development. Okay? We've got so much in store for you today. A brand new series is what's being launched here. The Well-Dressed Man. I've been dying to do this series for some time. I've got so many things prepared to communicate, but I want to start us off with the right framing to tell you why I'm doing this series and who the series is for and how I see you listening, those of you listening and viewing, benefiting from this. So, again, my name is James W. Falcon. I am 52 years of age. I was raised by a father who was several generations older than I was. So he passed along to me a lot of values that were what you would consider to be old-fashioned, but they are values that I have embraced very tightly, very closely, because they are values that have stood the test of time through multiple generations. And quite frankly, I may sound very prudish when I say it, they are values that I kind of see dissipating in society today. And they have to do with what a man looks like, what a man should be, how a man should present themselves. And I'm not saying these things to talk about the might and the power of masculinity. I'm not talking about that aspect of masculinity. I'm talking about, typically what you would see from a man, a gentleman, particularly in society, what I was raised to see, what I was raised to be. And all of this came to a head when recently someone near and dear to me graduated from school. And my love and I gave this young man a set of cufflinks that you would put in a French cuff shirt. Well, he had never worn a pair before. And it dawned on me that he didn't know what it was, not of anything being wrong. He just didn't know. But that's the kind of information that is typically passed from a father to a son, or from an older man to a younger man. I was raised with a father, a brother, and other men that wore French cuff shirts. Not that that made them any better than anybody. Please don't misunderstand me. I'm not talking about the fact that I feel like I'm better than anybody else because I wear a certain kind of shirt. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the knowledge and information that has typically been passed from generation to generation, either through the father-son, mother-daughter exchange, from generation to generation, that connects one generation with another generation's values, practices, best approaches, etc. So I wanted to kind of create a series that may help to bridge the gap for those of you that may not have had certain things communicated from the older men in your lives regarding your appearance, your dress, and certain apparel options. For example, this thing that I have around my neck is called an ascot. You see these from Hollywood folks a lot, but you don't see many common people, at least I never did, saw any common men wearing ascots. My father was probably one of the only men, and he only did that sparingly. My dad was a necktie, bow tie, three-piece suit kind of cat. But nonetheless, so what's an ascot to many people? Many people might say, well, who cares, James? I've lived this long, didn't know what an ascot was. Not sure I need to know. And you may not, and that's fine. But I want to talk about things like ascots, things like wearing the appropriate color and type sport coat, things like how important it is to have a crisp white shirt with whatever you wear suit was, whether it's semi-formal or formal. I want to talk about how to tie a necktie, how to actually put your French cufflinks into your French cuff shirt, why it's important to iron your collars certain ways. I want to talk about those things because all of those things speak to presentation values, how people presented themselves. And I'm going to tell you, coming from a family that didn't have a lot of money, who came from folk that didn't have a lot of money, we still had this tremendous expectation on how we were to present ourselves. I remember growing up feeling an enormous amount of, I'm not going to say pressure, but an enormous amount of responsibility to make sure that in all social settings, I presented myself in a way that was befitting my family's name and values. My mother would tell me, look, now when you go over here to where we were going, don't embarrass me. She would tell me all the time, you make sure that you live up to our family name. Don't embarrass me, she would say. So when I'd leave the house, going anywhere, whether it's to school, church, or whatever, I had this expectation, this responsibility that was resting on my shoulders that I am representative of a certain group of people, and I best do them proud in terms of my presentation. So I would interact with people realizing my last name means something. There's a connection. For example, my mother's maiden name was Galt, Gault. The Galts, my mother was one of 15 children. She was one of 12 children. All of my mother's brothers were shoe repairmen. They were shoe repair people from down south. So when they moved up here to Baltimore in the early part of the beginning years of the new century, the 20th century, during what's called historically the Great Black Migration, when 6 million African Americans left the South to look for living conditions that were not impacted by racial injustice, Jim Crowism, Klan raids, domestic terrorism, cross burnings, and that kind of stuff. They came to the North, like so many Black people did. My folks came from North and South Carolina, and they first came to D.C. and they came here to Baltimore. So that's my family background. But I say all that to say that one of the things that was really chiefly looked at and proliferated in my family, especially from my mother's side, was that the shoes you had on, I don't care how cheap or how expensive they were, they had best be shined and they better be looking showroom, off the shelf, perfect. So there was no excuse for me to ever have busted, embarrassing shoes on my feet. Matter of fact, when I would introduce whoever I was dating, when I would introduce the girls that I would date to my mother, first thing she would do is she would look her straight in the face and then she would look down on her shoes. Because my mother would always tell me, you say what says a lot, what says most about a person is the quality of their shoes, not how expensive or how cheap they are, but are they taking care of those shoes? Is there shine on the shoes? Are they polished? Are they scuffed up? Do they have sole savers and heel savers? Are they tied? That was part of it, and I understand now why that was. Part of it was part and parcel of our heritage in shoe repairing. The other part was, she's absolutely right. If you have taken great care to care for all of this and your shoes are not shined, you missed a golden opportunity to be fully impactful in your presentation. So part of what I'm going to talk about are the values that were passed along to me and that are still very prevalent in American society today, not just among African Americans, but among people in general. I'm going to talk to you about a lot of the values that stem from the business world, from the professional world, from banking and insurance, which will lead us to talking about the quality of suit, the type of suit, whether it's a pinstripe, a dark blue, a black, a gray suit, a brown suit, a khaki suit. We'll talk about those things. We'll talk about neckwear. Ascots are part of a neckwear family that are called cravats, C-R-A-V-A-T, cravats, cravats or cravats, whatever you want to pronounce it. And it comes from a European word that was the slang as it relates to a particular type of people. Cravats typically are the family of anything worn around the neck. So a bow tie, a necktie, and ascot are all considered cravats. We'll talk about it. We'll talk about what are some of the situations that require you to have a tie, an ascot, a bow tie, a necktie, and how to tie those things. Now, unfortunately, because I had a stroke in 2018, a lot of what I'm going to say and do, I'll be just using my one hand and arm, my right hand, but I can still work things enough. And what I can't do by showing you with my one hand, I'll provide diagrams or references where you can go out to the internet and see how that thing needs to be done. I'm going to talk to you about how to iron a dress shirt, so you'll know. I'm going to talk to you about why it's important to either iron or launder your dress shirts. I'm going to talk to you about how you iron the different panels of your shirt, how you crease your cuffs, how you wear your cuffs, how you wear your collars, just a smidge above the collar of your jacket, and why having a blue jacket is a must in every well-dressed man's um, garment arsenal in your closet. Why you need to have at least a blue blazer that you can sport at any point in time, and how it's important for you as a professional man, well-dressed man, to have multiple white shirts, cleaned and pressed, ready to wear, on notice, either behind your door at work, in your car, or at your home. You need to always have at least 3 to 4 crisp white, laundered, pressed white shirts. We'll talk about why that is the case. We'll talk about shoes, socks, belts, accessories like pocket squares and garments. We'll talk about the different things that you wear on your collar. Like for men, you can have a necktie with a tie bar. We'll talk about tie clips. We'll talk about haircuts, mustache, beard. We'll talk about everything that a man would need to know. And this will be beneficial information that'll be good for men, no matter your culture or race. There are values that I'm going to present to you more than anything that are what's called traditional values as it relates to dress, appearance, but most importantly, your presentation, because you get gussied up, so to speak. You dress up to present yourself, and there's a point to the presentation. One thing I would tell you that I want to launch this series with talking about, before we talk about the nuances and the specific clothing items and garments, is that before a man gets dressed, before he is ever considered dressed at all, let alone well dressed, the thing that a man must possess, and it's the same thing for a woman in a woman's world, the attitude is the thing that I want to talk about first. Before you get into the suit, the dress, the gown, the tuxedo, the jeans, the skirt, the shorts, the ascot, bow tie, necktie, before you get into anything that is either a formal or semi-formal dress item, the first thing you need to check is your attitude. Because on every watch list, whether it's the sexiest man or the sexiest woman, the one thing that the sexiest people have in common, first and foremost, is that they have an attitude about them, an air, a way that they present themselves, where even though they may look like somebody else, they have an air that distinguishes them from any and everybody else in their respective industry. And that air, that attitude, that mindset is something that you have to have first before you get dressed. Why are you getting dressed? For whom are you getting dressed? And what do you hope to convey after you are dressed? That's what we're going to be talking about in this first segment. In addition to everything else I mentioned, it's the reason why we all have loved James Bond. Because no matter who that actor is, the air of James Bond has been the thing that attracts us all to go see all the movies. I'm a huge James Bond fan, and likewise my dad was, and my brother was as well. We love that cat. Why? Because when he gets dressed up, you can't stop him. He is dangerous. He's got the guns and all the gadgets, but the cat looks smooth in his clothes, and he has an attitude that the ladies love. But every man can relate to. Everybody wants to be Sean Connery or Roger Moore, whoever your favorite Bond person was. You want to be James, how he conducted himself. You remember he would walk up to the bar. Yes, I'd like to have a martini or whatever it was, shaken, not stirred. What? Who says that? Only James Bond. But he did things in a certain way because of the mindset. Long before he put on that tux or whatever he was wearing in any given scene, James Bond 007 was a mindset. He had it. And nobody else. They had several 00s throughout the Bond series, but there was only one 007. That was the man, James Bond. Remember, he would introduce himself. The name's Bond, James Bond. And the point was, it was the air. Everybody wanted to be him. You want to be that person, not in arrogance, not that you think you're better than, not that you think you're above it. But when they're talking about pride, arrogance, and sick, twisted personal, you know, perception, we're talking about a confidence, one that's rooted and grounded in a humility that will allow us to interact with people and they see us and they say to themselves, who was that man that I met that had the weird looking necktie on? Who was that guy? He just, it was something about him. It's the thing that you want to leave as residue when you apply for a job, when you do your interview. That guy that came in, he just impressed me because he said X, Y, Z. You want to leave an impression. You want to leave a good impression. You want to leave residue, not a stench and not a stain. And that's who James Bond was. He left a fragrance in the room when he left that turned heads. Thankfully, I grew up in the house where the man, my father, was the epitome of a well-dressed man because it was the attitude he possessed, no matter what he had on. He was sharp. And when he sat down, he did certain things. My father would put his hand on the table and he would look and he would move in certain ways that was distinctively man, but it was distinctively James William Falcon. And there's never been a cat like my dad, let me tell you. Now, my brother had his own thing that he did that made him distinctively Michael. You see, those two guys together, I watched and I took tons of notes all my life watching these guys and how they moved, how they interacted, how my dad would always gather himself just before he stood up. And he would kind of slow, he would stand up real slow, but he would always have straightened up his collar and his jacket. My brother would just kind of do a little quick tuck when he would stand up with a tie on. These are the nuances. These are the pieces that make you attractive, whether professionally or romantically. But that's the mindset and the attitude that we want to speak to in this series, The Well-Dressed Man. So long before I talk about what you have on, I'm gonna talk about what you have in. Who are you? Who you are at the core. Because that's the thing. If you are ugly at the core, you can put a suit on it all you want. It's not going to change it. But if you are confident, if you are humble, if you are, hey, I'm here, guys. What can I do to help? Or where can I plug in? If you're constantly the person that's showing up, looking for a place that you can don to contribute, that's the person that people are going to make note of. If you happen to be an attractive guy, a handsome man, and you go places, okay, your looks are going to work for you in that manner. But just remember, long after the looks fade, or should you ever have a time when the looks begin to fade, there needs to be something of substance behind that handsome face. One of the things I'm focusing on at 52 as I get older is making sure that I'm a person of substance. So when the beard becomes a full gray, excuse me, instead of just a dashing lightning strike, as my love calls it, when I gray up completely and I wrinkle up or whatever, I want to be behind the face a man of substance, that when I say something, it brings value and light to whatever we're talking about. Not in the way that I want everybody to pay attention to me, no, but I want to be worthwhile in my contributions when I interact with people in work setting and in private settings, religious settings, whatever. I want to be because that's the man that my brother and the man that my father were, and all the men that I grew up with. I had one uncle who, believe it or not, this guy served in all four of the branches of the military. He was in the Marines, Army, the Navy, and the Air Force. All four. This was the coolest cat I had ever met. My uncle Edward Hope. He was married to my mother's youngest sister, my Aunt Dell, and they were my godmother and godfather. But my Uncle Ed was a boss cat. He listened to jazz music. He had a raspy voice. He was bow-legged. Everything he did, he smoked a little cigarette, and he looked like, like a version of Sammy Davis and the Rat Pack folks. He was just cool. Like everything he did was, yeah, baby, yeah, man, we did such and such. It was a time. We had a time, didn't we, bro? I mean, he was decorated as a soldier, but he was the coolest guy. But every time my Uncle Ed moved, he did something distinctively. He would hold his glass a certain way. He had his glass at a certain level at all times. He drank certain stuff only. When you saw my Uncle Ed, you saw an immense character person. And when he talked, he had something of value to say. He had something responsive, something intelligent, something of depth, of value. And he always had something pleasant to say on time. He would leave you laughing. These are the men I grew up around, which is why it's easy for me to want to do this series. I don't know that I'm a well-dressed man or not, but just based on the values that I have been given, I think I'm doing pretty well with living up to my dad, my brother, and my uncle's, bars that they set. And I want to just communicate in a very fun-filled, educational way some of these values. So in case you haven't had the opportunity to have them shared with you, I'd like to be able to talk to you about them in hopes that we can keep each other mutually responsible for the values that have existed, maybe plugging in and getting a little bit more, showing and displaying a little more of those values as we get older in this game called life. James W. Falcon is my name. I am all about personal growth and development, professional, spiritual, health and wellness, growth and development. That's why this channel was created. Thank you for checking me out. We've talked about the pilot episode of my brand new podcast series, The Well-Dressed Man. Continue to stay with me, and I guarantee you'll be enlightened, empowered, and educated. And you may get a few laughs along the way. Thanks so much. Whatever you do and however you do it, by listening, and my viewing friend, get, be, and stay encouraged. Also, we're going to have some guests on that will talk with me. I'll dialogue with them about, men in my age group, men in my generation that I can talk about. And we'll talk about how we came to be, how we came to know certain cultures. Like I come from a generation that was impacted by a generation of men that always wore a hat. Not a baseball cap, but a hat. Either a full gangster hat with a brim or what I call a paper boy. The 8-panel hat that you typically see in the earlier gangster days in the 20s. We'll talk about all those kind of nuances, why a well-dressed man needs to have a hat, why he puts his hat on the minute he steps outside, why he takes his hat off when he steps inside a building, how you hold your hat in your hand. You never put it on somebody's table. You never set it down on the floor or on any furniture. You hold your hat in your hand. We'll talk about something my dad used to do whenever we would go out as a family. Me, my dad, my brother, when we would go visit family and friends, go to church, my dad would look around at a certain point and he would say, "Hey, y'all, it's time to hat up." And he would put his hat on, which meant it's time to go. So wherever you were, it meant get your stuff together, meet him at the door, because it's time to hat up. Those are values. They're, hey, we put your hat on. You don't put your hat on in the inside. So me putting my hat on represents the fact that we're changing venues. We're leaving this place. Why? How do I know? Because Dad's hat is on. So it's time for us to move. We don't stay inside with a hat on. So we'll talk about those kind of things, fun-filled things that maybe you saw and you knew, and maybe we can help you connect some dots as to why those practices were in place. And we can help to educate each other. Maybe in me articulating those, you can remember and have some fond memories on what you saw your dad, your uncles, your brother, your grandparents do. And we can laugh and joke together. And I guarantee we will have laughs and jokes across racial and economic lines, regardless of what your faith backgrounds are. We'll be able to share in some commonalities. And I am confident that that will be the case. So join me for the remaining episodes of my brand new, fun-filled, enthusiastically delivered podcast series, The Well-Dressed Man. Here's my second close. Whatever you do, however you do it, get, be, and stay encouraged. For me and my heart and mind, to you and yours, peace and power. Take care.